Now, as we focus back on user to application segmentation as that first step, where do we start? Well, most organizations approach this with a pretty straightforward, simple approach. It may seem daunting as you're thinking about who all of my user groups are. Maybe that information isn't 100%. What are all of my private applications? Well, what we find is where most organizations start is identify your critical applications or your sensitive applications first. What are those crown jewel applications? And then limiting access to those applications to the users that need them. Really locking those down, segmenting those out first. Then the next key area for value is, along that same path, who are your critical or high-risk users? Do you have contractors that only need access to those 4 or 5 applications versus bringing them into your network with a VPN? Do you have other higher risk groups? Do you have suppliers? Do you have these other groups where it's a defined set of applications that you can segment out and just give access to those? And then finally, being able to enable access to the rest of the internal applications in order to continue business to operate and move forward. On the same hand, discover these internal applications and see how users are actually accessing them. So now, as you're going through the user to application segmentation journey, there are a few key capabilities and activities that will really help accelerate this. As previously mentioned, most organizations start with their critical applications. Taking this a step further, you could tier the risk of applications as well. Do you have a critical, high risk applications? And do you also know the very low risk applications that are maybe less important to segment in a first phase? Once you have this understanding of criticality, you can then start to break down by user groups. And then from this point, also, engaging with application owners can be a great approach to better understand both criticality and user-focused granularity, i.e. what users should have access. Overall, balancing those approaches with ZPA application discovery and analyzing user access behavior patterns is quite valuable. You can begin to fill in the gaps and drive a more granular approach by discovering new private applications, adding them to existing segments or groups, and also analyze and begin to split out applications based on what types of users are using them. For example, observing finance employees accessing finance applications or engineering department users and what applications they're accessing. Now, a final point here, we also have an advanced capability of leveraging machine learning on your discovered applications and user access behavior patterns to ultimately recommend new segments and policies. So, for example, starting to identify the key applications used by certain departments or group similar applications together by types by leveraging that same wildcard discovery and user app access discovery capabilities. Now, it's important to understand the segmentation components here before we get into the configuration details. Now, at the start, we have applications, application segments, and segment groups. An application is a fully qualified domain name, local domain name, or IP address that you define on a standard set of ports. Applications must be defined within an application segment. Now, stepping that up a tier, an application segment is a grouping of defined applications based upon access type or maybe user privileges. Now, similar application segments should be placed in a segment group. For example, if you have a set of defined application segments that you want only users from the sales department to access, you can create a segment group called sales applications and apply it to all sales related applications. Or as we can see 2 examples here, you have your engineering applications group, segment groups, or operations applications. As we go to configure this in product, we'll start with our deployed app connectors and app connector group, which is called London here. It is our app connector which has the welshgeek.net domain controller associated to it. It is located in London, so we want to ensure that the GeoIP location is properly configured. This will help ensure that a user will always connect to the closest app connector with regards to their proximity. So for this setup, we also have IPv4 DNS resolution only disabled because we actually have a mixture of IPv4 and IPv6 hosts present within this network, which is supported. Now here we have our server group called DC Discovery, and it has got a single app connector group configured to it. We have dynamic server discovery enabled, which means the app connector will dynamically do the DNS resolution and create a kind of virtual server for everything that it resolves. It's somewhat similar to how a load balancer works. And in most cases, the best practice, you will want dynamic server discovery enabled here. So let's move on to the application segmentation. Now we start with wildcard application segments. Now this wildcard represents the internal domain for the welshgeek.net. Now every server on the Active Directory will fall under this wildcard. We've enabled all ports 1 to 52 and 54 to 65535 for TCP and UDP. Notice that we have omitted port 53 so that DNS resolution remains intact. Also notice that we have a segment group called DC apps. Segment groups are necessary for grouping application segments so we can apply policy, the same policy on groups of applications. The server group, called DC Discovery, indicates which app connector groups the access policy should actually query. Now here with the access policies, we're going to keep it simple. It's important that we first ensure users have access to all applications before we start to tighten up our security with granularity. So here we are granting allow access to applications that match our wildcard *welshgeek.net. Now we have an application wildcard, an application connector deployed, configured to a server group with dynamic server discovery enabled, and our access policy to allow users to access. Now, what all this does is it's going to drive the discovery of applications as they're used. So from this point, if you think about those best practices, being able to enable access to all of these internal applications, you can start to create more granular user to application policies by selecting these discovered applications directly from the admin console, creating new segments, and then assigning policies against them. Now, again, we also have a capability of leveraging machine learning here that will make recommendations based off of the same data. And pulling this all together, as you think about the best practices approach, again, it's starting with the critical applications, define these, set these up, moving to higher risk users, leveraging the information that you have or can gain from application owners, you can do these things, and then ultimately having this application discovery, this wildcard segment configured so you can continue down that journey, creating more granular user to application segmentation policies.